closed in 1931 in the midst of the Depression.
After the hospital had folded and, he'd lost everything, I heard him say that was probably the saddest time of his life.
But in good times and in bad, Cayce never lost his prophetic touch. In fact, another set of readings had emerged in the 1920s, prophecies so astounding that they still echo today and may yet turn history on its head. For 43 years of his life, Edgar Cayce would lie down on a couch, place his hands on his solar plexus, and fall into a self-induced trance. In this state, he traveled through space and time, foretelling wars, diagnosing illnesses, and in some of his most intriguing readings, rewriting history.
When we consider Edgar Cayce's predictions, it's also interesting to look at some of the retrocognitive statements he made, looking back into history and making statements about things you wouldn't find in the history book.
The sleeping Cayce seemed to know secrets about our past that only the most high-tech instruments and years of excavating could reveal. Long before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, Cayce spoke of an ancient sect of Judaism, the Essenes, which experts believed was made up exclusively of men.
Edgar Cayce spoke about the Essenes as a community that included men, women, and children.
Experts remained dubious, but in the 1950s, years after Cayce's death, archaeologists uncovered skeletons of Essene women near the site of the Dead Sea Scrolls.
With geology, there are some interesting things as well. Cayce suggested that at one time the Nile River flowed in the opposite direction and actually emptied directly into the Atlantic Ocean.
Amazingly, in the 1980s, satellite images from the space shuttle revealed unknown river valleys beneath the driest parts of the Sahara. More imaging and on-site exploration revealed that the Nile may indeed have once flowed through the Sahara and into the Atlantic.
In Edgar Cayce's lifetime, much of what he said about lost civilizations, ancient worlds, was regarded as science fiction. It really wasn't until this century, and literally the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that people have begun to look much harder and realistically at these readings as perhaps, well, maybe these aren't so far-fetched.
Probably the most astounding historical readings Cayce gave had to do with the lost land of Atlantis.
Atlantis, from Edgar Cayce's perspective, was the first great Eden on the earth. It predates the Eden that we know of between the Tigris and the Euphrates, the Eden of Adam and Eve. Edgar Cayce saw Atlantis as a massive continent in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. At the time, the individuals that populated the area had a deep understanding of the forces of the universe and could actually harness some of these powers to use devices such as flying machines and crystals and so forth.
But according to the readings, the Atlanteans abused their power over nature, and Atlantis disappeared in a cataclysmic disaster some 10,000 years ago. Cayce's most specifically timed prophecies said portions of Atlantis would rise again in 1968. It did not. But that year, a strange formation known as the Bimini Road was discovered in the Bahamas.
Most geologists think it's beach rock. Beach rock is rock that fractures parallel to the shore. Well, this is parallel to the shore, but the end of it curves around in a kind of a J shape, so that's unusual.
No one has gathered any conclusive evidence yet that proves Atlantis lies beneath the Bahamas. But according to Cayce, Bimini isn't our only link to the lost continent. Before the final destruction, he said, Atlanteans hid records of their earliest history in other locations.
One was in the Yucatan Peninsula. The other was off the right front paw of the Sphinx in Egypt.
In the early 1990s, Dr. Robert Schoch, a professor of geology at Boston University, conducted geological and seismic surveys on the Sphinx.
I was not in the business to support Edgar Cayce or any other, I'll call him psychic or prophet. I really knew nothing about him other than his name.
Schock and his team were about to make an astounding discovery.
We were able to model what was underneath the Great Sphinx. We found under and in front of the left paw of the Sphinx what I believe is a major chamber, maybe up to 25 meters below the surface. Based on its regularity, it looks like it was human carved, and not only is it definitely there, but it seems to have something in it. The way it resonated, the way it ringed, seems to indicate there's something in the chamber.
Is it the Atlanteans' Hall of Records Cayce spoke of? No one has explored it further, and as intriguing as they are, so far Cayce's Atlantis prophecies have come up short. But some suggest that it's Cayce's method and not his material that will have the most far-reaching effect on our understanding of ourselves and the world around us. In fact, Cayce suggested that with practice, we could all do what he did.
I do not believe there is a single individual that does not possess this same ability I have. If they would only be willing to pay the price of detachment from self-interest that it takes to develop those abilities.
Cayce was even able to describe where he got the information that came to him in trance. He said it came from the subconscious mind of the individual he was reading for, and from the Akashic records, a universal source of knowledge that held all of the pasts, presents, and unfolding futures of mankind.
Edgar Cayce said, ultimately, when you view it from the highest dimension, there is no time and no space. There is no future and no past. It all is occurring in one fascinating moment of expression, but time is an illusion that has purpose.
Cayce's readings also suggested that we could impact the future. This idea was shared by another great prophet, Nostradamus.
Edgar Cayce and Nostradamus both shared the belief that the future was malleable, changeable. It's also true that if you're a prophet, you're also a propagandist. You're trying to persuade, often, the future to change.
Why would Cayce want the future to change? And what cataclysmic prophecies did he foresee for the new millennium?
Edgar Cayce made some extraordinary and spectacular Earth change predictions, something that would be catastrophic, probably even beyond what we could imagine.
From Nostradamus to the Mayas, prophets and prophetic traditions the world over warn of cataclysmic earth changes that will soon be upon us.
The ancient Mayans had a sense that there would come a time, about in these times in which we're living now, that would include tremendous destruction. They speak about the day of the withered fruit and the great tempest, things that sound rather scary.
The Hopi speak of trees dying and dramatic changes in the weather that will bring in the great day of purification. Nostradamus speaks of the dead rising from their grave. And Prophet Mother Shipton warns,
storms shall rage and oceans roar, old worlds shall die and new be born.
As for Cayce's predictions for the new millennium, they are as dire as all the other prophets before him.
Edgar Cayce made some extraordinary and spectacular Earth change predictions. Probably the biggest one was that the rotational axis of the Earth would change. And that's something that would be catastrophic, probably even beyond what we could imagine if that took place literally.
If the tilt axis of the Earth shifted slightly, the entire mass of the Earth would have to reconfigure itself. It would shift ocean basins, it would shift where valleys are, where mountains are.
Some of Cayce's visions of that future were truly terrifying.
He speaks of Japan going into the ocean, inundations for southeastern United States, perhaps in a very slow way, but a permanent kind of inundation.
Cayce also warned the East Coast would not be spared.
Portions of the now east coast of New York, or New York City itself, will in the main disappear. This will be another generation, though. Here, while the southern portions of Carolina, Georgia, these will disappear. This will be much sooner.
He also suggests that Europe would change either geologically or climatologically in the twinkling of an eye.
Cayce actually foresaw these as part of the shifting of the poles. He stated that the Great Lakes would flow down through the Mississippi Valley system and from there flow right into the Gulf.
A Amazingly, Cayce, who knew nothing about plate tectonics, said signs within the Earth would warn us of this coming pole shift.
The most dramatic predictions that Edgar Cayce made is that there would be the onset of major Earth changes that would escalate in activity from 1958 on through 1998. From that period on, these trends, they would escalate again, then we would know that the pole shift was coming.
There will be the upheavals in the Arctic and in the Antarctic that will make for the eruption of volcanoes in the torrid areas, and this will begin in those periods in 58 to 98.
Volcanic activity events are increasing. The torrid zone activity has increased along with general world increase by something like 500% in the last 50 years.
Cayce also predicted a surge in violent storms and earthquakes in this period. In the last 10 years, hurricane activity in the Atlantic has been at its highest, and an increasing number of earthquakes are being detected around the globe. And in 1999, German researchers measured more than 200 earthquakes in a period of 7 months above the Arctic Circle. Are Cayce, Shipton, Nostradamus, and the Maya and Hopis before them reading from the same book of prophecy?
People from different cultures seem to have been able to tune into a kind of universal mind, that same level that Nostradamus and Edgar Cayce seem to have been able to tune into also.
Is the world as we know it about to end?
Some disaster with our skies, with our crops, with our rising oceans, they all can basically agree on that. They may emphasize one aspect more than others, but they all share the fact that we are entering a period of evolutionary crisis.
So many different prophetic traditions have talked about times of destruction, times of dire cataclysm, death, devastation. More than anything, those predictions are a wake-up call for all of us, as individuals, as a nation, as a world, to look at our relationship to the earth, to nature, and to our relationship with each other.
As dire as his Earth prophecies appear, Cayce believed in living in the present. He also believed, like Nostradamus and other prophets before him, that we have a hand in how the future will unfold. Still, in 1939, just as Cayce had predicted, a Second World War broke out. And in 1941, as America became entangled in the conflict, more and more people wrote or came to him asking about the fate of loved ones who were fighting abroad.
Edgar, in his own readings, was reminded to give not more than 2 a day, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, because each psychic reading was emotionally draining to a system. Well, Edgar Cayce could not say no to people, and that ultimately brought his downfall, because by the summer of 1944, he was giving 7 and 8 readings a day.
In September of 1944, fatigued and depleted, Edgar Cayce suffered a stroke. He died on January 3, 1945 in Virginia Beach. He's buried in his hometown of Hopkinsville, Kentucky. Outside the cemetery, a bronze plaque stands as a testament to his work. But to many, he was more than just a great prophet.
Relegating Edgar Cayce to the place of someone who simply predicted the future makes Edgar Cayce an event. And in my opinion, the material is so helpful, so valuable, that it's much more a source of information that help people in the here and now.
He isn't any one thing. That is, you can't stick him in a box and label it mystic. You can't stick him in a box and label him psychic. You can't stick him in a box and label him prophet. At the end of the day, Edgar Cayce's readings are not about whether he was right or wrong about Egyptian or Atlantean history, or whether there even was that kind of history. I think at the end of the day, what matters is that he helps us to better understand who we are and why we're here.
Today, the Cayce materials continue to provide insights into most every subject under the sun. Whatever he did and however he did it, Cayce, like all the great seers before him, left behind a vision of what our future could be. Whether that future unfolds remains to be seen.